great to be with you, everybody. This is Dr. Marcia McFee, and I want to thank you for being on live, and those of you who are watching the recording, not to worry, you're going to get all of this great material, all this great content. And we'll have a webinar next week if you want to be on live, or send me your questions over email, and we'll make sure we get all of your questions answered. We're so very excited that you are a part of this Lent worship series called Gifts of the Dark Wood. And let me just do a couple of introductions. You just met Jordan, who is our Director of Operations, and he is available to help you if you are having any technical difficulties. We put his text number in the email that you got. And also we have on hand Jenna, who's over in the chat box. She is our project assistant and social media guru, and she is going to be helping field your questions over there in the chat box. Thanks, Jenna, for being on. We also have, you can see in your video feed, we have Eric Elnes, who is the author of Gifts of the Dark Wood, the inspiration for this entire series. Oh, there he has the book up. All right, great. And we also have Chuck Bell, a frequent collaborator of mine and a musician extraordinaire. And we have collaborated on some original music, but Chuck is also doing a lot of arranging for the series, and you'll hear all about that later. Well, friends, this Lent worship series is the first of perhaps an experiment that we're doing here in the Worship Design Studio, and that is to provide you this season, because Lent was so early and you just got done working so hard on Advent and Christmas, we have given you full scripts. Now, this is something we don't normally do in the Worship Design Studio. We normally give you series and we give you synopses, we give you ideas for every Sunday, but we don't put the scripts together for you. But this series, we have done so, and I'm very excited about this to see how it might help you learn even more about doing sensory-rich worship. So besides giving you a series that's going to be rich in material, a rich journey, it's also a great way to train some of your folks to learn more about what we teach in the Worship Design Studio in terms of, the principles of sensory-rich worship and how to do it without getting burned out. So the two webinars are going to sort of be divided up like this. This morning we are talking about, or this afternoon, depending on where you are in the country, we are talking about sort of the substance, the materials, what you have at your disposal. Then what I'm hoping is that you will take this next week to really take a look at the scripts, dig in them. I'm going to give you at the end of this podcast some preparation steps to do. Dig into that so that you can figure out what are the questions that you have about putting this together, so that the second webinar will have another guest expert, Mark Burrows, who wrote all of our children's scripts for children's time in worship. But we'll have Q&A time where we can specifically talk about your questions and also some of the principles of sensory-rich worship that we teach in the Worship Design Studio to help you really make this a deep and rich, meaningful, and memorable experience. What we call in the Worship Design Studio, good. So here's what we're going to do. I want to talk to Eric first, and we're going to talk about sort of the inspiration, and that is the book, Gifts of the Dark Wood. Eric invited Chuck and I to come and be with him for a retreat based on the book at the BTS Center near Boston, Maine, actually. I guess it was about a year ago, wasn't it, Eric? And we had a great time. And I was so touched by the material that I knew that I wanted to put this together as a worship series. So Eric, tell us a little bit about your inspiration to write this book about, the journey through those times in our lives that might not feel so great, might be filled with a lot of angst, but in fact, you are helping us to see there may be great gifts in that. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. And by the way, it's great to see you again, Marcia.
Yeah.
I remember that retreat very fondly. There's this huge snowstorm too that got us all socked in, but it was great fun indoors.
It was.
But the really kind of the beginnings of the book really came during a rather dark period of my own life where I had, I just kind of thought, just to try to break things up in my own head, just try to make a list of the things that in my ministry that I might look back and be proud of. I was just kind of like, in ministry, everything's so invisible, most of your advances are invisible. They're not tangible. It's not like you built a house or something, and so sometimes you could be susceptible to like wondering, have I done anything in my whole ministry? And so I thought, I'm going to make a list. Have I done anything? And I actually, a few things made that list. I was happy to see. But when I did make the list and looked it over as a whole, I was shocked by what I found. And that is that nearly everything that I was actually happy about in hindsight and really thought I was flowing in my best and was following the Spirit's direction in my life and all that, that they were actually quite directly or at least highly indirectly, but related to times of failure, of struggle, of emptiness, of getting lost and finding a new direction, in such a way that I had to respond to significant challenge, and that in my response, it actually opened me up to a new direction. And when I kind of made that discovery, I started thinking about just kind of how we in our culture have this mythos that we hold up so dearly that we never question, which is that you kind of do the work you do to kind of reach a point in life where you're beyond all that struggle, and you succeed and life will never hurt you again. And I realized it was actually life hurting me that I actually came to some of the greatest and best stuff in my ministry, and realized that that's just a completely fictitious myth. There is no point in your life where you're beyond all that. So why not see it in a new way? And that prompted me to look back into the scriptures and also my childhood heroes, people like Martin Luther King Jr. and Dorothy Day and Abraham Lincoln and George Washington Carver. All of those people had long lists of successes, but they'd also had quite a long lists of periods of dark nights of the soul and struggles and challenges and so forth. I realized their directions had been very similar. And same thing with the biblical passages, the heroes. One of my great heroes, I write about this in chapter 1, but one of my great heroes was Peter. And boy, Peter's got great successes, but also miserable failures that really, I argue in the book, were quite directly responsible for some of his greatest successes. So that's really the perspective from which the book comes out of. And I would just add one more thing. I mean, the biggest dark wood wanderer I found in my own reading of Scripture is Jesus, and who tells us, properly translated, and I get into this in the book if anyone wants to follow through on this, but properly translated, the very first words out of his mouth in both Matthew and in Mark's gospel, and the very thing that he tells the disciples to preach in Luke, and when they go over, he sends out the 12, is heaven is now, or the kingdom is now, not just about now, is now. It's already here. Change your whole way of thinking and believe the good news. That's the more classic translation is the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of God, depending on the gospel you read, has drawn near. Repent, metanoia, which means a complete change of thought. And then Mark adds, believe the good news. And if you can actually take this seriously, that heaven is now, to be found now. It's not a denial of the afterlife, but that you can actually, that we are actually already living our eternal life. It's already begun for us. We're already living, to the extent we can, our experience of heaven. It does create a whole change of thought that's necessary. And some pushback, starts evolving. You think, well, wait a minute. You look at all the troubles of the world. I mean, there's warfare, there's poverty, there's famine, there's death, all these things. And, that just can't be right. And you can imagine, though, Jesus's first century audience saying, you must be smoking crack, Jesus. I mean, the Romans are on our back, and there's death, and all these things. That laundry list that we ourselves would make, they were likely making it too. And I think it's significant that in the very next public statement out of Jesus's mouth in Matthew is his famous Beatitudes, and where he seems to be taking on every single objection they have for why heaven can't be found now, and contradicting that. You say you're poor in spirit, you're blessed. You say you're mourning the loss of a loved one, you're blessed. You say you're persecuted, you're blessed. On down the line he goes, to the point where if you're actually going to take Jesus seriously, you actually have to redefine what heaven even is, because now living in the now is about struggle if it's about anything else. And so you actually have to learn to develop eyesight to see heaven in the heart of our struggles, not merely in the absence of them.
And that
And that is really
and thus comes, every chapter, if you're uncertain, you're blessed. If you're lost,
Right.
you're blessed. It's a kind of a beatitudes for us to say in the midst of these things that we'd rather avoid. Actually, these are the things that help us to live life to the fullest and to bring the reign of God into the now, because we work perhaps more diligently. Perhaps our eyes are more open to alleviating the suffering around us if we're more open to how we are dealing with that suffering. It's really, I think, a timely message in the liturgical year, especially in Lent. And this is why I really wanted to develop this worship series for Lent, because Lent is usually a time where we get a little bit more introspective about our journeys. It's a time historically, liturgically, where we spend more reflective, quiet time discerning, talking about images of journey. What for you do you think could be really the takeaways for congregations in delving into these journeys, into these sort of beatitudes in the midst of hard times? You are blessed. What could be the takeaways, you think, especially during Lent?
Yeah. Well, one takeaway is actually related to also the word of caution I would make. I think you're absolutely right that this book functions as like a modern day Beatitudes. You're blessed when you're empty. You're blessed when you're lost, and so forth. But you have to be careful also. And I didn't hear you saying this, but just in terms of preaching it, teaching it, you have to be careful not to simply imply that what you're going to be telling people is like this really bad experience is now, if you just look at it right, it's really good.
Right.
Because there are bad experiences that happen to us that I don't know if we'd ever look back and say that they were good.
Right.
However, spiritual path that's developed in this book, and I think that Jesus was trying to get us at, helps us, and also that Paul, when he tries to get us on too, for that matter, is one in which God is able to, in our conversation with God, our life with God, is able to weave these good, bad, and ugly experiences together in our life in such a way that we reach a point where we can look back, maybe a week later, maybe a month later, maybe years later, maybe decades later, and say, I would never have wished that this, or this had happened to me, and yet, in order to stand at the place I now stand, I would live it all over again to be in this place.
Yeah.
To me, that's the mark of spiritual path. And I think that one of the huge takeaways from this Darkwood path is not being so doggone afraid of when life hits us hard. And going into Lent, there's a great thematic piece in this too, because you go from Jesus being baptized and this incredible spiritual high that he surely would have been on, if the Gospels even capture a tenth of the essence of what happened at his baptism. This incredible high. What does it say next? And the Spirit drove him into the wilderness.
Right.
And how often
to be tempted. To get hungry. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And how oftentimes do we find ourselves in the wilderness, being tempted and hungry and so forth, and asking, we say, what have I done wrong? What's wrong with me that put me here? And you look at Jesus' path, though, is actually what was right with him that put him there. Incidentally, I talk about the wilderness too extensively in Under the Gift of Temptation too. So that's a good Lenten piece.
Exactly.
But really helping people see the struggles of their life, not as simply as the judgment of the world, the heavens, the gods, God, what have you, on how bad they are, but actually see the struggles as part of the natural, or this stage of our journey, that struggle actually is part of it, and it's not that all struggle is, everything that comes at us is always good, but the basic attitude towards dealing with struggle actually is a good one and a godly one. And when people make that discovery for themselves, that they don't have to keep running away from struggle all the time,
Right.
and finding their gifts, then they're a lot less shell shocked when the next struggle comes, and also a little less disappointed maybe with their lives or with God when
Exactly.
that
I mean,
comes
if
too.
we build up this expectation that we're all waiting to get to the moment where everything will be fine, it's continual disappointment and fear if you're afraid of those moments. And I think a lot of people live that way, right? And you mentioned a source of theology that's just, you know, we can tell ourselves that God doesn't make bad things happen, but there's a lot of people who still are steeped, and maybe they grew up with that idea and are still trying to disconnect from the idea that that things are happening because they're bad people or what have you. But to understand is a fabric of life, and that struggle is part of that fabric of life. And yet struggle happens when even at birth we have to struggle to get to get out. It's just part of that whole fabric of life, and what we do with it, and how we deal with it in community, I think, is another question to ask, and another reason to bring this not just in a personal book study, which of course would be wonderful, and I know a lot of people have bought the book and are very grateful for the kind of reflection that it is inviting them to do personally, but in community. Studying this book together, doing this worship series together, could be quite a wonderful way to deepen how you walk the journey together. Any comments
No
about
question.
that?
Yeah, I think that preaching has been likened to standing up and putting a long neck beer bottle on the floor, standing with a pitcher of water and trying to pour water through the neck of that beer bottle, and only a little bit gets in, and you could refine your preaching, become an extraordinary preacher, and you might get a little bit more of the water in than somebody else. But bottom line is, what really fills that bottle, I think, more than anything else, is when we are in a small community with others, and we're just hashing these things out.
Mm-hmm.
So I have benefited for years now in my ministry through actually making sure I have small groups that are that are
Mm-hmm.
following the worship series.
Right.
And so Sunday morning gets their taste. They're like, oh my gosh, that's interesting, and then that just whets the taste buds, and then they really want to go deeper. And having a small group
Mm-hmm.
do that,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be a large forum too. I mean, you could do it that way too. But having a small group to really hash these things out is incredibly good. And Gifts of the Dark Wood, actually, and I don't mean this by way of an advertisement, I mean this actually worked in my church this way, that it actually helps a small group form and develop that group identity faster than most other
Mm.
Bible studies do, because what Gifts of the Dark Wood or other Bible studies that are thematically related to this do is it encourages your people to become self-disclosive with each other.
Mm.
And that's when somebody finally says, you know what, this emptiness thing, I know about that. I know something about that.
Yeah.
And they dare to kind of open their soul up to the group. Suddenly it's like, oh, this is getting real
Right.
now.
Right.
And it also says to the rest of the group, oh, that person just was vulnerable like that and survived. Maybe I can do that too.
Right. Right.
And to do that, it becomes extremely close,
Yeah.
especially if you have confidentiality built into that
Right.
group setting.
Exactly.
Likelihood of small groups lasting well beyond Lent. I mean, if I were doing this and had small groups going, I would count on the fact that they're going to want more studies after this. They're not going to want to break up after Lent. They're going to say, what's next?
Right.
What's
Right.
next?
Exactly. Well, folks who downloaded the materials, you know that in the document that's the bonus materials, we have a link to get the small group resources, the DVDs, or you can download them electronically, of the Gifts of the Dark Wood, hosted by Eric, and to use these simultaneously to create small groups that are studying the book, who are meeting together using the DVDs. And Eric has given us a very generous promo code for that, so very reasonable. And what I heard you say, Eric, is that the way that you have found it most successful is to have the worship service, and then follow the week following, when the small groups to get together, they're talking about what they experienced in worship. And I think this just takes it even deeper. You get introduced to the whole idea of that particular chapter in worship. And then you get to have sort of almost debriefing with each other around that in the small group time. And one of the things that keeping this in mind, the Ash Wednesday service is a little bit different than a normal Ash Wednesday service, in that what I'm suggesting that you do is treat it like a worship service, but also sort of a kickoff of that kind of sharing, that kind of small group sharing. And those of you who've downloaded the scripts, when you're looking at Ash Wednesday, you'll see that there's a moment in there where people are at tables, is what I'm thinking, is that this Ash Wednesday service would be maybe in the fellowship hall, or you just have them group up in small little groups in their pews or their chairs in the worship space, and invite them to share with each other. Is there a time in your life where you felt like you were on this journey through the dark wood? And so it kind of kicks off that idea that we're not just going to talk about it, but we're going to really be reflective and live into that. And even if you don't feel like you're in a dark wood moment right now, all of us can remember a time when we were. And so I think it's really going to be relevant to folks across the board. So anything else you want to tell us about preparing for preaching? You know, your book is going to be great fodder. I mean, people will read the chapters, and you know, I challenge anyone not to find something to preach about after they read a chapter. But anything else from your experience of actually preaching this before you wrote the book that you want to share with us?
Sure. Well, first of all, we had wonderful fun dressing up the sanctuary to look like a dark wood.
Yes.
There are all kinds of things you can do with that, branches, leaves, everything. And you could also use in preaching metaphors from the dark wood, roots, leaves, branches, clearings in the dark wood, things like that are also helpful. I've always benefited, or at least for the last 15 of my 20 years in ministry, from having a worship team or some form of small group that I'm actively in conversation with before Sunday, that I'm actively throwing out ideas and hearing their ideas and processing the sermon. So I actually spend a good, and Marcia, you've experienced this at my church, for every Sunday worship, I spend about 2 hours just talking, having a conversation with the worship team on the scripture. Now, your time limitations might be, you may not be able to do that, but just to even have your own small group, like form your own small group that actually does meet ahead of that Sunday.
Ahead of it,
and that's hand selected by you. Go through the book, go through the scriptures, those kind of things.
It's a great idea.
Or maybe do the dark wood, what have you. It's going to give you so much material. It's not even funny.
Yeah. And then it's about editing it down, right? That's an excellent idea.
The way I edit down, actually, I notice what's resonating with the group, too. That's really helpful for me. So sometimes, I'm a kind of a pastor geek, person, and I'll throw out an idea that I'm just totally excited about, but then it's just like people are like, huh?
Blank
and it
stares.
may just that I had the wrong idea, but maybe I have not described it well enough, too.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Well, listen, there's other places you can get fodder from Eric besides this little time with him, besides the DVDs, besides the book. And there are some links. Jenna, if you would put up in the chat box some of the links to a couple of podcasts. One is a half an hour long, one is an hour long. So if you want to hear Eric talk more about the book, talk more about the gifts of the dark wood, listen to those. And also there was someone, Eric, that you mentioned to me who actually did this series already and posted some sermon material. So, if that's helpful to folks, we'll put that link up there as well. So, Eric, thank you so much, for being the inspiration for this whole series. Like I said, when we worked together on that retreat in last January, it really struck me. The material really struck me, and the book is not a long or difficult read. I just devoured it. So, my suggestion would be to pastors, even in this week, as you're looking at the scripts, just read that book. You'll be able to do it between now and the next webinar, just to steep yourself in it and begin to take Eric's experience and his words and begin to make it your own, so that you can lead your congregation in a deeply meaningful journey. So thank you so much, Eric. I know you have to get back to your staff meeting where you are brainstorming about whatever you're doing next. But thanks so much
Yes.
for being with us.
Well, thank you, and I'd make a personal invitation to your viewers too. Anybody who likes Marcia McFee, I consider a friend of mine, or at least a potential friend. And so, if you're on Facebook, feel free to send me a friend request. I love to meet up with people and be in contact with people who are like-minded. Also, and I couldn't fulfill this for every single one of your viewers, but I have been known to, if there's a small group that's interested in Skyping in, they've been studying one of my books and they want to have a conversation, I have been known to get on Skype and say hello and answer questions, that kind of thing. So I can't guarantee that I could do that, but if you send me an email or get me on Facebook, if I have the time, I'm more than happy to do it.
Great. So yeah, your personal page, Eric Elnes, and also I think Gifts of the Dark Wood has a Facebook page, does it not?
Yes, it does.
Great.
Yes,
So we're hoping that all these churches will share pictures, photos, ideas. That's one of the great things about many churches doing this, is that we can share with each other ideas. So Worship Design Studio Facebook page as well will be a great place to share those ideas. All right, Eric, thanks so much.
Well, thanks, and thanks for those nice comments too on the chat.
All right, great. Wonderful. Okay, so we are going to shift a little bit and talk about the actual resources that you downloaded, hopefully. As you know, the series, I've designed an Ash Wednesday service. It's kind of a retreat-like setting, rather than perhaps the kind of Ash Wednesday services you've had before, but not difficult to put together. There's the 6 Sundays of Lent, those services that you can download. Then I have a Holy Week service, which includes a dramatic setting for 6 characters. There are 6 monologues. There's ritual actions attached to it. These are all characters that went through and walked with Jesus in that Darkwood moment of his life, that last week before his crucifixion and resurrection. These can be done, if you have, dramatist actors in your congregation, they may want to memorize them. Or you can just do reader's theater kind of thing where people are reading out of a notebook, or a combination of both. So you don't have to think that you have to have actors to do it. So there's also, then it finishes up with an Easter sunrise service. And the reason why I did this is because I wanted you to feel free to, on your Easter Sunday morning, to begin your next series for the Easter season. So we end the journey in the dark wood with that Easter sunrise, and then you're free to do whatever you're going to do on Easter morning that leads into the next 7 weeks, or the great 50 days of the Easter season. So that's what is in that you downloaded. Now, there's also an overview of the order of worship, just to help you see sort of at a glance the way that we structured it. And of course, not all churches are the same. Not all of you will have that same order of worship. You might want to try on that order of worship for size, if you want to just follow that, letting your folks know that for this season it might feel a little bit different, but we're going to go on a journey, a special journey. Or you might want to just lift the material out of my scripts and put it in an order of worship that feels more familiar to you. I used an order of worship that follows sort of the more traditional, historical order of worship, with the sermon, and then response to the sermon with our prayers and our offerings and communion on that one Sunday. Now, if you do communion every Sunday, of course, you'll have to adapt to include that as well. So you're going to have to adapt. I've given you the blueprint, but I have sent you both PDFs and I've put it in a Word document so that you can take it then and move it around as you need to in that Word document. Now, you also downloaded the music scores for the theme songs, the 2 theme songs. The one that happens at the beginning called There's a Path, and also the one that repeats every week called, what is it called? Come and Rest. I know what it's called. I wrote it with Chuck. Come and Rest. Now, I had some people ask me about lead sheets because what you downloaded was the piano scores. There are lead sheets that Chuck has worked on, and I'm going to send you another email with those lead sheets. So watch out for those if you have a band who just wants to use the lead sheets. We have visual installation ideas. As Eric talked about, we are giving you lots of ideas to use in your sanctuary. And I think you're going to have a lot of fun creating an atmosphere that invites us into that environment, into that journey together. We'll talk more about that next time, about the visual installations, more in detail, and I'll take your questions about that then. Now, children's time scripts. Mark Burrows, who is a nationally recognized children's expert, children's worship expert, has written out scripts for children's time. And I'm loving this. It's so terrific. And he's going to be on our webinar next week to talk through those with you. Just in really wonderful and provocative ways to include children. And we're going to learn a lot about doing children's time in the meantime, and talking to Mark next week. Now, you also, as I mentioned, got a document of bonus materials with links and discounts for books, discounts for the books, discounts for those small group DVDs that Eric talked about. Also, Travis Reed from theworkofthepeople.com, which is a media production company, my favorite one out there. There's a lot of people creating videos for worship, but theworkofthepeople.com is what I use regularly. I think they have a beautiful array of meaningful, aesthetically pleasing, theologically grounded videos. And so for every one of the services, we have suggested some loops from them. And so those are things that you downloaded. Now, we in the bonus materials, let's just remember, I've got a slide up here, the Gifts of the Dark Wood from Darkwood Brew, those DVDs. You know, if you don't want to do small groups that watch the DVDs, I would get these just for sermon fodder as well. So preachers, think about that. And then the discounts on the books, especially if you're going to do a book study and you want to make those available to your congregation, you're going to really want that discount on that. And then Chuck's scores, and we're going to talk to Chuck in just a moment. Chuck has, of course, written the scores for our theme songs, but also a set of piano preludes and some arrangements for some familiar hymns. And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. All right, so Mark Burrows, again, will be with us next week. Richard Bruxfort Culligan is also a guest expert in the Worship Design Studio, a musician, composer. He's a psalmist, and he creates really wonderful, short, brief, easy songs for congregations. And so I have used several examples or suggestions throughout the scripts of his. Stephanie Rhodes did our suggestions for anthems and handbells. So those are all through the scripts. I hope that's helpful to you. And then, of course, the media ones. So that's all that we have in those bonus materials. So let us talk to Chuck Bell. Chuck, if you would turn your video camera on and join us here. Let's see, maybe you are. There he is. Yay, Chuck Bell.
Oh,
he is.
There we go. Now I'm on.
All right. Well, you heard, those of you who came on early enough to the webinar to hear Chuck, he was playing, giving you a little preview of something he's been working diligently on in just the last couple of weeks. And that is, Chuck has been writing piano preludes for all 6 Sundays, and they are now up on his website. Jenna, if you can put that link to those, to his website, and he also, so right there on the website, right, Chuck, it says, what does it say that you can get to it?
Here, I just put the link into the chat box.
Nice.
The direct link, and then Jenna put the Chuck Bell music. But you can search for Darkwood, and it'll pull up resources that are directly connected to this series.
Great. Excellent. So let's talk first, though, about the feel. And that directly corresponds to these preludes that you've written, because certainly music as people are coming in, which is what a prelude is, right? It's the main function of a prelude is to set the tone. And this series has a very specific kind of tone. Talk to us a little bit about some of the things that you've been experiencing as you've been composing these preludes.
Well, what's really cool about writing these piano pieces and then listening to Eric talk is the way that he discovered these gifts of the dark wood was he had to go through these things before he saw the gift. And so the preludes are basically representation of those specific theme words that you have put together: emptiness, uncertainty, misfits, temptation. So all of the songs have a theme that would relate to that word. For example, temptation. This is a little out of the box, but I wrote a tango for it because a tango, and it's a very simple tango, but it creates this haunting melody that's part of temptation. And I think there's no other representation in music than the tango to represent temptation. So, or we look at Lost. Lost uses a lot of open chords. There's not defined minor or major. Same thing with uncertainty. There's no definition in that whatsoever. My favorite one that's growing on me is the misfits. And so what I did with that piece specifically is realizing that all of us are a misfit in some aspect. And we can be very unique in our own way. And if we, when we collaborate with our misfittiness, is that a word? Can I make that word, misfittiness? We can make beautiful music together. So what I've done with this piece is I've created a melody that begins in the right hand, but the left hand is playing a different rhythm and a different melody not lined up with it. But later on in the piece, everything lines up. And so you hear a misrepresentation, a crazy melody at the beginning that turns into something beautiful.
Wow.
So that's just kind of an overview of kind of what I've done with these preludes. I think that it's so important to find something. If you don't use these piano preludes, just find something that matches with the style and the theme that we're setting up for the beginning of the service. What right. You don't want is something that's
right. Yeah, because it makes a difference. Even if people are talking over preludes, which they usually do, what the prelude is doing is sort of setting a feel in the room. And certainly for this, now that we have that in our ears, please give us something else. Maybe do the first one. Maybe just.
You want to hear it? Yeah. How about Thunderstruck? Thunderstruck is one of my favorite ones. Okay. Want to hear a little bit of that?
Sure.
Let me pull that up. Actually, no, I'll do Uncertainty. That's the first one.
Okay.
So Uncertainty, right. I actually wrote 2 of these that can be used with full worship bands. So I'm working on those chord sheets now. They should be out next week.
Okay.
So if you purchase the piano preludes, you'll also get the chord sheet that goes along with these 2, so your full band can to do a prelude with it. So this one's Uncertainty, and it's another one of those that doesn't really have resolution. It always stays unresolved in what it does.
Nice.
So sounds a little bit like this.
That's beautiful. That
goes on and on.
Yeah, and it gives you such the sense of going somewhere, sort of a meandering. I love that. One thing I want to say about Chuck is that Chuck, you studied in college specifically around commercial music and film score. And so specifically, one of the reasons I love working with Chuck is because I think it's so important, the role of music, not just in the hymns, the anthems, the songs that we pick, but how music is offering a soundscape, we might call it, for the worship. And so in your scripts, folks, I have written in rubrics, right? The rubrics are instructions, and the rubrics might say the music continues under the next reading, right? So what we're trying to encourage you to do is to see, musicians, see yourselves, not just as somebody who, when it's time to plug in the song or the hymn or whatever, but that you are creating this soundtrack for the whole worship experience. And so in giving you these full scripts, I'm able to demonstrate what Chuck and I do a lot when we're leading worship together. And that is to decide certain times when the reading will be underscored by music. Now, you don't want to do that all the time, but that is a really important thing to do. So, you're going to see a lot of that in the rubrics as you look at the scripts. So Chuck, yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say also about these preludes is that there's enough material in there that they can be used as a sound bed throughout the service. So there's little pieces that you can pull out. There's multiple themes that are part of it. So even if you're looking for instrumental music underneath a prayer or leading into a part of the service, you can find some good nuggets inside of all these pieces.
Yeah, borrow from that. Great. So let's talk about the theme songs specifically. And Jenna, if you would go ahead and put the links to those YouTube videos that people can maybe open up and listen to later. Many of you probably have already listened to them, but these are two very, very important songs throughout the whole series. One of the things that we teach in the Worship Design Studio is that repetition is really good within a series. So even if the two songs will be new to your congregation at the beginning, by the time you get to week 5, week 6, it will just be part of who they are, part of the fabric of the whole series. And they're simple enough that they're very easy and learnable, and they're call and response to that first one. And what you see there on the slide is just a reminder that we've got the piano scores, and we'll be sending you the lead sheets that Chuck has just put together. So, Chuck, let's talk about those theme songs a little bit. Every service begins with a threshold moment. And in the Worship Design Studio, we call the threshold moment that moment where we introduce the theme for the day, so that everything in the service, you're seeing it through that lens. Right. Too often, we design worship where the songs and things before the sermon may in fact have to do with the message, but because we haven't been introduced to that, like this is the message for the day, we don't get to glean as much meaning from it as if we knew from the get-go where we're going. And so that YouTube video of There's a Path is exactly how I have written it into the service, so that you have a soloist sing it the first time. Then the music continues underneath as you do that synopsis for the day. That's setting the lens and how you're going to look at what you're doing today. And then you repeat it again. Now on the recording, we don't have the congregational response, but then the second time you do it, there's a path, and then there's the repeat. So Chuck, I don't know if we can do this long distance, but let's try it, all right? You do the congregational part, all right? So this would be the second time through. So a soloist would have sung that first. Then pastor would have read that little synopsis. And then when you come back in, the congregation is going to do a little repeat. So it would sound like this. There's a path, though it winds its way through darkness, we would choose to avoid it if we could. We awake to an unexpected calling. God says come.
God says come.
There are gifts in the dark wood. Okay, so the timing is off because we're like, thousands of miles apart. But you get the idea. So the congregation is just doing this little echo thing. And it'll be super simple for them. They'll be able to do it right off the bat. And it will become that thread. We call them threads, those things that repeat. So that should be really simple. We got it. I think we gave it to you in a couple of different keys, depending on whether you flipped out when you saw what seven sharps or something in one of them.
Sorry, I wrote it in G flat.
Of course you did.
Actually, you sang it in G flat, and I wrote it the melody.
All right, so it's my fault. Okay, but and nevertheless, he also put it in F, so it's a lot better for accompanists who are not used to that many flats.
Like me.
Right. Right. Okay. So there's the two theme songs. So the other YouTube link will also go to the Come and Rest. Now you'll hear in that Chuck used a little recorder. It gave it kind of a little Celtic flair almost. But if you have somebody, even a kid who's studying recorder, or something really simple, and I don't know, Chuck, that you wrote that into the score, but tell us a little bit about just adding a little bit of instrumentation, because I think no matter whether you're traditional or contemporary or alternative or whatever it is, you can take these two pieces and use different instrumentation and it will work for whatever setting.
Absolutely. I'm going to disappear for 5 seconds and grab a recorder and show you. Hold on.
Okay. Stay tuned. Now, let me say something about the YouTube, what we did in the YouTube link, and that is it's maybe a little bit longer than you would do it when you set it into prayer time. So don't think you have to follow any of these things religiously, so to speak. Adapt it for your own use. So yes, Chuck is back. He's got his recorder.
I'm back. Here I am. So we used a string pad along with the piano. This is a great way that you can incorporate traditional instruments. So you could use a pipe organ that's actually holding down the droning using a bourdon or a very simple principle. So just for the purpose of us doing this, I'm going to hold it down on a string pad. Can you hear that?
Yep.
So then taking the recorder or any other instrument, staying in the key of D, and I did not define whether it was major or minor when we started, but it's written in minor, but we leave the open D. Then it allows me to then you can easily add some other instrumentation on top of it. Same thing with guitars. We added some lead sheets and some chord sheets for that. So this would be really pretty picking guitar on this, because it's really just 3 chords over and over again that create the foundation for this melody that just sort of becomes this this ethereal thing that sort of floats above the accompaniment.
Yeah, and even if you don't have instrumentalists, let's say you have an organist, the organ could actually hold that open D in the pedals, create sort of this drone softly, and the piano could then do a little bit over the top like you were doing with the recorder. So again, you just have to sort of experiment with it, with what you have. And Chuck is always open for helping out with suggestions. And I think will you be back next week with us, Chuck? Could you answer some questions next week, maybe, or we can send them to you by email?
I believe I got to check my schedule.
It's okay. Don't worry. We'll hope whatever you have, we'll cancel it. Okay.
I think I should be in town.
Okay.
I don't think I'm going anywhere.
All right. So let me say a little bit about the scripts. I've put up here on the slides just a picture of those PDFs and the doc, the Word doc. And again, you can use that Word doc to move it around, make it your own. Let me say something about the colors. The colors in the script. The red are rubrics. You've heard me say about rubrics, right? So instructions. So this is exactly how I do my scripts. So these would be leader scripts. You would have these in notebooks while you lead worship. And it has the rubrics in there. Rubrics are instructions like the piano keeps playing underneath this, or the lights lower, or what have you. Those are your instructions. All of the things that I have in blue that's what I use when I'm putting my scripts together. If we have media and I need to have words on the screen, I'm going to make everything that needs to be a slide in blue. And then when I hand that script to my person who is, making the slides, they know exactly what they need. So that's why the blue is in there. So those are a couple things you need to know about the scripts. Now let's look at the first one briefly, just to answer a couple of questions that I know will come up. So we've gone over this first threshold moment, right? So it's all written out for you there, and the way that I would do that and how the music comes back in. Now, opening hymn or song, let me just say something about the music throughout, and that is that Chuck and I both, and Jenna helped us as well, looked for hymns and songs that would be a mix of new and familiar. Now, we have the sort of acronyms of the hymnals that these things are in, and there's a few songs, like in the first service, the scripture song, which is a wonderful song called Bidden Unbidden, is from Worship and Song, and I don't think it's anywhere in any other hymnal or songbook. Now, there are, four times, I think, in the scripts, in all the scripts, where there are songbooks that you might not have. But here's the thing, I really want to encourage you to expand your library. Doing this series, let it be a way of expanding your library and learning about things, not just regurgitating what I've given you, but let it be a learning thing and let it expand your library. So, Jenna, if you could put up in the chat box the link to our favorite Worship Design Studio songbooks. You can all get in there and take a look. And if you don't have, for instance, Worship and Song, I use in there. GTG is Glory to God. That is the new Presbyterian hymnal, new a couple of years ago. That is a terrific hymnal, my friends. And no matter what denomination you are, I would say get yourself a copy. There are a couple songs in here that I have used that I couldn't find in other hymnals. But I want to encourage you to do that. There's links to order all of these different songbooks. Of course, if you want to use something that's more familiar, any one of these song slots, hymn slots, you're going to want to, just take a look. And you want a nice mix of things that are familiar and also perhaps some new things. Don't overwhelm your folks with new things. You really want things, that nice balance, right? So, Glory to God, Worship and Song. There's also one in Sing, Prayer, and Praise, which is a songbook out of the United Church of Christ tradition. Jenna said, if I were marooned on an island and could only take one hymnal, I would definitely take Glory to God. Seriously, that's everything you need. Seriously. No, it's a really terrific collection. They did a great job. So, like I said, just go through these, look at the music suggestions. Don't wait for the week before. All right, I'm going to give you here in just these last few minutes some things that I want you to do to prepare. And I would love for you to do it in the next week before our next webinar so that you can know what questions you have. All right, so those are some things about the scripts. At the very end of the scripts, there are worship notes, and so you'll need to insert your license numbers if you're using music, especially if you're putting words up or if you're putting music in your worship guide. You want to use the right licenses. You'll probably need one license in CCLI to do everything there, but it's a good time just to make sure you have all of those things. Of course, you have the scripts the scores to the 2 theme songs. Chuck has some arrangements of some of the familiar hymns you'll find in there that you can get on his website. I mean, Chuck, really, you don't charge enough. I mean, it's like $3 for a new arrangement to a familiar hymn. I think he's got "For the Beauty of the Earth," which is my very favorite Chuck arrangement, which he calls "Ch-arrangements." "Be Still My Soul." There's a Holy Week piano score, and also he's working on "Just a Closer Walk with Thee," and that will be up within the next week as well. So go through all of these. Now, let's take a look at how we prepare. Preparation before the series. I've got this slide up here. Go through the scripts for each worship art. So I've done this myself. Go through, make yourself a list of all the hymns and songs, and pick which ones you're going to do. Some of them are more traditional, some are more contemporary. Just so you know, in the scripts, I put all the words to the more traditional ones in the script, just to model how you will fill in your scripts. So there are more contemporary songs in there for the song selections, but I haven't put all the text and the words in there. So what music will work for us? What do we need to replace? Make a list of all that, go through it, make your decisions so that your musicians can begin to rehearse. Sketch a visuals plan for your sanctuary. What materials do you need? Look at that visual installation document that you downloaded. We'll talk more about that next week. How many readers do you need? Go through and pick how many readers, who's going to read scripture. Do we want different voices for these things? Go through, decide how many readers you need for each service, and schedule folks. Begin to search for media images. Our favorite places are unsplash.com and morguefile.com. These are free photos. And you just search for woods and path and all kinds of things. So you will find lots of images that you can use on the screens. Next week, I am going to show you how to make a logo for your series. All right, we didn't make you a logo because I want to teach you how to do that. Make a logo, you find a picture that you like, put the words on it, put your time, that kind of thing. And we'll also talk about perhaps making some series trailers for it. All right, practice the children's times. Take a look at those. Again, Mark Burrows is going to be on next week. He will talk through that with us some. So take a look at that. Give it to your folks who usually, do your children's times. If it's not the pastor, there's some materials you'll have to put together for that, a backpack and some rocks and some signs and things. It's not extensive. Practice the thread items. That's going to be your opening song, your prayer song. Practice those first. Get those really under your belt. Get that flavor of the season, and then begin to practice all of the other things. Now, I want you to think about identifying a series team leader for this series. Somebody who can help with the organization of details and organization of times when visual folks are going to get together. This is something that in the Worship Design Studio I've been trying to urge folks to do in the last couple of years, and that is not let all the details fall to the pastor. So Jenna, if you can put up, I've got a link to a document. If you'll download that as well, and just take a look at what a series team leader does that can really help it all the details run very smoothly. Okay, so friends, that's an hour already. Amazing. This is why I knew I had to have 2 webinars because there was no way we could get everything in. I want to thank Eric and Chuck for being on with us in this webinar. There are, so many people who have contributed to putting this together, and I'm so grateful and excited that we will get to go through this series together. So Chuck, will you send us out with a little bit of music as people are leaving? We'll just let you play through whatever you want to, maybe one of the preludes or what have you, whatever you want to do as folks are going so that they can get another sense of something in their ears.
Absolutely. I'll do the Thunderstruck. And I'll do that.
Okay, great. Well, friend.
Thanks for having me on, Marcia.
All right, thanks, Chuck. And we'll see everybody next week. If you're watching the recording, be sure to come on live next week, or if it's not a good time again, watch the next recording. We're going to try to get you as prepped as possible for this series because I want you to have a deeply meaningful, memorable, wonderful Lent series. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.